So over the course of being a landlord, you are going to have your share of tenant disputes, for sure. And what I'm always going to recommend is just take the high road and avoid the big fight if you can. You know, examples of tenant disputes are going to be security deposit refunds, right? Discrepancies over their understanding of what wear and tear is versus what your understanding of wear and tear is. Oftentimes tenants will have an issue if you take from their deposit for painting that was needed throughout the apartment or cleaning that was needed throughout the apartment. So, as usual, have all your ducks in a row on the front end. Make sure you always video the condition of the apartment prior to them moving in. If there's a move out process involved, take a video of the condition of the apartment, time and date stamped after they move out. That way you at least have some facts that you can fall back on. And when you do get into a dispute with them over something like a security deposit, it's going to go to court, ultimately if you can't resolve it with them. I would recommend compromising. So for example, if a tenant came back and said, hey, you took, 1,000 from my security deposit, I'm demanding it back. Try to compromise with them, right? Try to meet them in the middle. Hey, I'll give you $500 back if we put this to bed. Oftentimes they will agree, but sometimes tenants will, become emotional about it and insist upon getting everything back, at which point it will end up in court for a judge. Then the judge will decide what is the wear and tear. The judge will decide if the things you pulled from the deposit are reasonable or not. And depending upon the city that you're going to court in, you may not like the outcome because the judges more and more tend to side with tenants in these matters. So it's best just to avoid wasting your time going to court, that entire negative experience, ultimately to end up losing money anyway, and try to compromise with the tenant. If it's something glaring, like really obvious, like damage to a carpet or something like that, then yeah, I think it's worth fighting for. But ultimately, if it comes down to like your interpretation of wear and tear versus theirs, I would say it's not worth the fight and try to avoid it. Another example of a dispute you'll have with a tenant would be, throughout an eviction process, right? So a lot of times when a tenant is behind on the rent, all of a sudden they bring forth all of these maintenance issues that you were never aware of, right? So they stop paying the rent, and then all these maintenance issues come up. So they're gonna do things like this sometimes. They're gonna find things or manufacture things that are wrong that justify them not paying the rent. Again, as with anything, you want to have it really well documented. I had a tenant we were going through the eviction process on, and they went to codes and said that we didn't do all of these maintenance things that we weren't aware of. We went and fixed these things and documented it, and then they were magically broken again. And then when we went back to fix them again, they wouldn't provide access. We ended up having to go to their apartment with the police to be given access just to fix the things that the tenants demanded us to fix. I mean, while they're being evicted. So they'll do anything and everything to bar your way, to stay in the apartment as long as they can, before the eviction, goes through. They'll do everything in their power to, to stay there rent free, essentially, while damaging the property too. So evictions are another great example of, a dispute that you're going to get into with a tenant. And you want to make sure you have everything documented, because the tenants will bring all this before a judge. They will say, oh, this property wasn't maintained, my landlord was terrible, this and that. And you want to be able to have video, print out photos, time and date stamp conversations. You want to have all of this stuff documented. That's why you don't want to do text messages. You don't want to do phone calls. When these issues get escalated, when these disputes get escalated, to a point where you feel like it's not something that can be amicably resolved through compromise, you need to document everything. You need to put it on paper, get it in an email, and stop doing the text messaging and the phone calls, because it's only going to serve to hurt you. And the tenants know that, right? The tenants know that this, casual form of communication isn't going to be beneficial to you in court when they go there. So again, with disputes in general, whether it's an eviction or it's a dispute over, the security deposit refund that you gave them, avoid court if you can. Compromise with them. It's generally not going to be worth the fight, right? Chasing $1,000, $1,500 is not going to be worth your time and headache of preparing a case, of taking the time to go to court. Sometimes the tenants ask for, an adjournment. They just string it along because they know that the more that they string this thing along, the more likely you are to get fatigued from it and just give up, right? So try to avoid all that, try to compromise with them, or try to just let it go, especially with a dispute pertaining to an eviction. What's your primary focus, right? The primary focus should be regain possession of your property. If you have to give up money to do that, so be it. But regain possession of the property. I've had plenty of times where, we'll go to an eviction proceeding and the judge will say, well, maybe give the tenant a chance to catch up. Mind you, the tenant's behind $7,000 in rent. We'll give them a chance. They'll pay an extra couple hundred a month, and okay, well, what are the penalties? When do they default? Well, if the minute they default, we'll give the warrant for the eviction, right? And of course, they immediately default on it. But try to avoid those types of compromises too. I've been firm in court and said, no, I don't want to make deals. You know what? Let's forgive the balance. Just get them out. I want the warrant. I want the warrant for the eviction. I don't want them to go on a payment plan that they're going to default on. They've made it very clear that they're incapable of paying the rent. Why would they suddenly be successful in a payment plan? Payment plans generally don't work. They might be good at most for 6 to 7 months. They pay back a small portion of them. They inevitably fall behind again. So when you go to court, if you have to go to court over an eviction, your primary focus is to regain possession of the property. And I would give up a lot of stuff just to get back possession of the property and move on. Because the other thing to bear in mind, when you're dealing with an eviction or you're dealing with some kind of dispute in the courts while the tenant is living in your property, they're doing damage the entire time, whether it's just wear and tear or negligence or whatever it may be. They're doing damage. And so your bill is going up day by day until you regain possession of that property. So make regaining possession your primary focus. And then again, if you have a dispute with a tenant, just try to resolve it without having to go to court with a compromise, even if it means you have to give up quite a bit to do so.